What I found is if you can get 20 to 25% of your culture adopting some new standards, new behaviors, and new principles, right? That's the domino point where it creates that vacuum and begins to pull everybody else in, right? So I think a lot of times, Justin, I see people say we're going to change the entire culture around, and that's virtually impossible to change the entire culture around. Can you change 25 to 30% of the culture? Yeah. And then what will happen is those that don't want to buy into the new culture will either leave, and then they're not going to do the things that you wanted them to do in the first place, right? Or they'll adopt.
Yeah, that was like my question was, I know that I talked to a lot of people, a lot of teams, me being on the tech side of all of this now, like I still interact with lots and lots of large teams that would probably say that they had that culture in the very beginning and it's not that anymore. And they're a little nervous to bring it back because, well, I think they're scared that people are going to quit and people are going to leave and people are going to go because they got used to something else. What would be your encouragement for helping somebody turn the tide of that ship back around to being a bit more of an efficient organization like it was in the beginning?
So first and foremost, I think you've got to be willing to break some eggs to make the omelet, as they say, and not be held hostage to those agents that you're afraid of losing. And I think, I do believe that you've got to continually be bringing new blood into the organization. You've got to be prospecting to be able to actually to acquire new agents. What I have had the privilege of doing with a lot of these larger teams is coming in and saying, okay, cool, let's get your onboarding set. Let's set some new standards. The standards aren't necessarily like just production-based standards. I see the average on the industrial size team, as far as the standard of production, is about 16. It says, if you want to hold your spot on this team, you got to sell 16 homes. If I'm going to invest in you, if I'm going to put the time in, et cetera. I work one of my, believe it or not, one of my partners, he's like my general manager for my company right now, even though he's my coach, is Bob Corcoran. And Bob's like, it needs to be 20. I'm like, bro, like it's 16 is what I see is where you can really get your teeth in and say, hey, this is it. And if you fall below, then you're going on a performance improvement plan. And then if you can't actually hit the PIP, then you're off the team, right? And I think that's a fair number to hit. So you have to have, number one, your onboarding in place to be able to make sure that the new people coming in adopt the new actions and behaviors and the prospecting, and we follow a schedule and we use scripts. Yeah. And then as those people come in, you're not, if the bigger producers, and I think this is critical as well too, the bigger producers, your top 20%, honestly, Justin, it's hands off. Just go like stallion, go run in the field and keep doing what you're doing. We're not going to mess with you. In fact, we're going to applaud you. Don't mess with our new culture that we're building. Don't be a disruptor in it. Support it, but you've earned the right. And so I think a lot of people come in and they say, oh, we're changing the culture. All of our freaking top 20%, we want you to adopt this. No, man, they have earned the right to opt out a lot of this as long as that they produce, right? And so, and then everyone else will get that option of opting out as their production goes up. Now, if their production drops down, guess what? You're back on standards. And we need to actually keep an eye on the number of hours that you're doing.
This episode is sponsored by Follow Up Boss. And I know you, Justin, and Lindsay both know that I made the switch about a year ago to Follow Up Boss from being in one CRM for the last 13 years.
I read a stat the other day that 32 of the top 50 teams in the United States use Follow Up Boss already. So, I guess the proof's in the pudding there.
So whether you have a super team like George or a mini team like me, Follow Up Boss makes it super easy for teams of all sizes to get organized, stay on top of their leads and spheres with less effort, and improve overall performance so you can scale your business.
And thanks to FUB, all of our listeners can double their free trial and get a full 30 days to see how Follow Up Boss can level up your business. And there's no contract necessary, no credit cards required, completely free to give it a go. So visit followupboss.com/inspection period for more details. And thanks, Follow Up Boss, for making this possible. Yeah, when you first said that, I was like, well, how do you stop that from being a double standard, for that person, we just let them do whatever they want because they're good at their job, but they don't fit the culture. You have that dynamic with in my world, employees, we've had to let go of a very talented engineer because he just did not fit our culture at all, even though he was very, very good at his job, Dude,
a cultural mismatch is a goodbye for me anytime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that for me is, I don't care if you're selling 100 homes a year, if you're disrupting the culture, like, because as a CEO of an organization, and like we're all like, whether it's Lindsay as a CEO of her group, or you of your company, or Laughton with his group as well too, or me with my company, our number one job needs to be to create an environment where people can naturally succeed, right? I mean, for me, that's my job as CEO, and to guard that culture like a mama or papa bear. I guess a mama bear, papa bears just go off into the woods, whatever papa bears do, right? So, and so if there's a cultural mismatch, conversation number one, and it's not even a conversation number two at that point. I know that sounds like a pretty hard line in the sand, but one of the biggest mistakes I've made over the years as owning an organization, whether it's our mortgage company or our coaching company, is knowing someone needs to go, dragging my feet on it, and then all of a sudden one person turns into four.
Oh yeah, that's the worst, man. Just like it sours the whole batch, like you keep that going in there. And especially in small team world, like I'm a big proponent in tech land of small engineering teams of A players. And funny enough, if you actually establish a culture like that, if you try to throw a B player in that, it's almost unfair to the B player because they're going to get eaten alive by the A player. So because I think I've seen when people try to turn that tide around, they're most worried about their agents that have been with them for a very long time, that are like more like family to them. And they're like, I can't call that person and tell them that they need to be in the office 4 times a week prospecting. They're literally going to slash my tires in the parking lot. Like, I can't do that.
And in many cases, you don't have to, because they're producers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, it really is an earned right of freedom, like that. So I got a therapist. I should probably have a whole team of them, but I have a therapist, right? So, and we've talked about it in raising, like I'm primarily raised my son and my daughter. Had my daughter for 2 years nonstop, and we talked about it in terms of rocks, right? Like, you give them rocks of responsibility, you see how they handle those rocks, and if they drop the rocks, then you take them back, and you actually have to give them a little bit more discipline, a little more boundaries. And then as they begin to actually hold it, then you give them a little bit more freedom. Well, I think, I don't think the standards are there to take away freedom. I think they're there to be able to give people a pathway to have more freedom, and to be able to have the disciplines and the rituals and the, you know what I mean? And so when someone hits, like if we, let's say we say the standard of 16, right? And I've done this with multiple teams. And then we got someone that, like, for 2 quarters is selling 5 or 6 homes. Guess what? You're opted out. You know what I mean? And like, you've earned the right. And it really is a celebratory moment, right? It actually gives you the chance to be able to celebrate them and honor them. Like, dude, sister or brother, you did all of this, and now you've earned this right. And it's a pathway for other people to look at it, because they know there's clarity in terms of how you opt out. Then there's not that feeling of nepotism, if you will. I know nepotism is typically used to be able to describe, a family-run business, but the nepotism can exist in terms of, favoritism. Yeah. There's not that sense of favoritism, because people go, hey, these people earned it.
And as a reminder, Inspection Period listeners get a full 30-day trial of FUB. No contract, no credit card required. Just go to followboss.com/inspection period for more details.